Welcome, everyone. The Politics Faculty of the National Law School of India University. I'm very happy to have this freewheeling chat with you, which some of which occurs on our corridors and in our cafes and canteens. But this time we are recording this chat for our viewers, parents, teachers, and students who are interested in our new BA program. Some of whom got to meet some of you at our campus day in February, but many of them were not here, so could not meet the faculty that were present. So many people across the country have asked questions about our faculty and faculty strengths, faculty research interests, etc. So we're recording this conversation for the purposes of our viewers on our social media and YouTube channels. I'll get started right away. I'll introduce each one of you very briefly, and then I have about 3 to 4 questions, and I hope we can get into a nice conversation. We have with us today Sushmita Pati, whose work many of you would have seen, a property on kind of rental property in Delhi, and she'll talk about her current research as this conversation progresses. Karthik Ram Manoharan, who's also part of the politics faculty, whose work on Periyar and Fano, some of you would have come across. And Karthik will also talk about his current research as this conversation progresses. Debangana, who's also a part of the politics faculty and is an expert on gender studies and international relations. And Dayal, who's recently joined us, is also a scholar of politics and indigeneity, if I'm not mistaken. Without further ado, I'll ask my first question, Dayal, and any of you can start off the conversation. Is what drew you to this discipline, political science? I'm guessing all of you got PhDs in the discipline that is called political science. What drew you in the beginning, and what kept you stuck? What kept you going? Anyone who wants to start? Shall I cold call?
Yes.
Uh, okay, I can start. As in,
Yeah.
I took political science in my undergraduate, and I'm uh, one of those people who stayed with political science for their entire education. So the reason I did political science, not because it was some informed choice, but because at that time, as when I was 17, I thought I wanted to become a journalist. And there are only like so many ways you can become a journalist, either by studying English literature or by studying something which is more contemporary. So I thought, okay, political science it is. And that's how I came into political science, when I realized it has got nothing to do with, or at least as in it's on the face of it, when you're doing political theory and when you're doing international politics, it feels so far removed from the world of journalism. But then I veered into different areas and stuck to academics and studying political science in its and political theory more seriously and more closely.
Anyone else?
If I
Karthik, go
may,
ahead. Yeah,
Anju,
of course. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'll just follow from what Sushmita mentioned. The reasoning is quite the same. Not necessarily when we make a choice, for undergraduate courses, we know what we are heading towards or whether we are going to do a PhD or not. So that's quite the same. This seemed like a possibility where there are multiple interesting questions which could be asked. And I think for me, one of the things that have always bothered me is the issue of gender. Of course, the way I think of gender today is not the same as when I first started thinking about those literature which only talk about men's issues, and the world seems like the language also revolves around men. So I think that used to bother me, and from there there was this thing that then what kind of society and political life that we are in, what kind of representation do we have? Those were the things that bothered me as I entered social studies generally. And I think I continued staying with that. And at a later point, my PhD is in international politics, interestingly, where and why that is so, I decided to stay with international relations, the language of which is quite androcentric, I would say. And I remember sitting in one of the classrooms where the traditional weapons defense mechanisms were being taught. And I felt so alienated in that classroom. It seemed like I don't know this language. So that made me stick to my initial uh, endeavor or quest to think about gender more closely. And to do that, in a way, challenging a discipline which is international relations, and to make sure that both of them can integrate together.
Okay.
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just a second. Can you give me a minute? There's someone at the door, and I'll just check who it is, and I'll be back. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go
Can
ahead,
I go
Dehan.
on then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I have very different reasons why I fell into political science, I would say. I think from a very young age, I was interested in politics because I was a huge sports fan. And I remember I found very striking similarities with politics as I witnessed in my village. I come from a part of Kerala where there is some phenomenon called party family, and I'm sure it's in other parts also, where people actually identify the familial tradition with a certain political partisanship. And I found this performativity, this partisanship of sports very similar to politics. So I was very interested in elections, to be frank, very from a very young age. And I think it's the NCRT textbook of ninth and 10th which actually introduced me that one can look at politics more systematically. But due to peer pressure or familiar pressure, I was forced to take science of my plus one, plus two, but eventually ended up doing a social science degree at the Hyderabad University, where we actually had an option to choose a major after 3 years. We'll end up doing a social science 3 years, and then we can have we can major in one of the social sciences. And I think then I reunited with politics in many other ways. I should also mention my teachers. I think teachers would also be a very important reason that why we actually been attracted to certain disciplines. And I think that's also one of the other reasons I was interested. But later on, my research has been largely interdisciplinary. I drew heavily on sociology and anthropology for my PhD, but of course, I maintain my home in political science in various ways.
Okay, so that leaves me. Thank you. I did my master's in history at JNU, right? And initially, my idea was to do a PhD in history as well, right? But then came along Niladri Bhattacharya and MSS Pandian, who taught courses on history of political thought, right? And some of the thinkers whom they introduced to us were quite fascinating. And I wanted to study them not from the perspective of intellectual history or the history of ideas, but from the vantage point of political theory. So that's the reason I made my shift in my PhD. I would say that politics generally has been a discipline which has interested me for quite a while, in the sense that I took part in a lot of debates on contemporary politics during my undergrad days and during my uh, in my postgrad diploma at ACJ. But apart from that, I never thought initially that I would pursue politics for my PhD. So it was this exposure to this a variety of texts which I got at JNU, which drew me towards this direction. And I felt that a PhD in political theory, very specifically, would give me the conceptual tools needed to understand certain issues that I was grappling with at that time.
Right. I actually didn't know that you were at ACJ, Karthik. That's quite
Yeah.
interesting. And several of you have stuck with politics throughout your academic training, but Karthik has had a kind of a hop, skip, jump trajectory.
Completely.
How I want to know from all of you that Dayal said, and I know Susmita's work draws heavily from other disciplines like sociology and anthropology, Debangana from feminist theory, gender studies, etc. Karthik from history, intellectual history especially. What is common to political science that weaves in all these kind of diverse ways of studying politics together? I mean, what is it that is political science about all these disparate things that you all mentioned and described?
If I may start, I think a certain common point is the elephant in the room, which is the question of the state, right? I think all of us, in some way or the other, have to deal with and do deal with the state in our own lines of work. And I think that sort of brings us together as a politics cluster. But,
Yeah, anyone else wants to jump in on that?
I would just add on to what Karthik was saying because I was asking the same question in today's class. My first class of the term began today because in the sociology term, we're all sociology. I mean, Atreyee might know we're also looking at the question of state, right? But I think apart from what we're looking at the question of state, it's also where we are looking from, right? We're also looking from the larger standpoint of institutional and non-institutional politics, right? In a way, we're all looking at society, but this position of institutions, state and its institutions becomes very prominent in your field anyway. Yeah, I think in that sense, largely to add on what Karthik was saying.
So I think you want to say something.
Yeah. No, before I was trying to say that let's go in the reverse order, but Karthik started anyway. So, what I was, as in this precisely, as in just adding to what Karthik and Dayal have just said. I think what makes a discipline for me, as in, I think it's the questions, right? As in, what questions are we asking? The methods, I feel, it's always, I think it's important to be more less rigid about the use of methods and who owns methods. I don't think any discipline owns any particular methods. But questions, I feel, are defined by disciplines. So for me, it's of course states, it's institutions, and not quite institutions. But for me, what defines politics is power, right? Where does power reside? Who has power? What is this? As in, a lot of politics is about how does power get distributed, right? And whether it's resources, whether it's decision making, whether it is the family, whether it is a neighborhood group, whether it is international politics, does UN have the power? I think that then becomes the core question for me as to where is power really. It could be in the state, it could be outside the state, but that's what to me makes politics.
I think if I may just say that the discipline where I'm trained in, which is international relations, is extremely concerned about the state. And we can also say it's over concerned about the state, can be exhausting. As a result, the inclination for me so political science, but very particularly when I look at international relations, the endeavor for me has always been to push that boundary a little more. So it's not to say that the state doesn't matter, but where do we push the line of the discipline? So even in my work, what reflects is the individual, the women and their lived experiences, how we integrate that as a matter of international relations, and how it's not necessarily about a top-down flow, but could also be a mutual flow between the top and the down, right? So I think that could very well think of, what also makes us together as a cluster is the fact that we are interested to understand that what does it mean for us to be individuals, and these individuals are part of a collective. That could be a social life, that could also be a larger national life and an international life. And what are these interconnections?
I'm remembering, the anthropologist of the 1950s, the British anthropologist Evans Pritchard, who studied segmentary states if I'm not mistaken, in Africa, in possibly in Sudan, and showed that there are state-like things within social forms which are not really kind of modern state as we know it, but yeah, that really kind of spoke to, that one can find politics literally everywhere, inside the family, inside social groups. But I'm interested to push forward to I mean without I'm going to change track, but I'm interested to just quickly push forward on the question that the state is important to academics who study politics in the formal way, political scientists to be precise. And the study of the state outside of the state is a really important democratic project. For a healthy democracy, someone should, like the kind of data collection, Lokniti, and other organizations that collect data about various kind of state formations, elections, and so on, do. And what do you think about this stance of being outside the state and looking at the state kind of with a certain kind of critical or ambivalent eye, which is this kind of journalists do some of it, but they can't. They have to file a story every day, and they don't have the time and the bandwidth to study the state in a long arc, which is what I think political scientists do quite well. What do you think about this? Karthik, you seem like you want to speak.
No, I'll follow from others.
No, so I think I'll just pick from what you were saying, Atreyee, which is about what are state-like formations, right? And sometimes you see different kinds of formations behave like the state, right? And the state behaving like other institutions, right? So as in, I was recently re-watching The Wire, which is this American long TV show, which is about America and Baltimore, and how there are drug gangs running, and when you see how they operate, they literally work. You see, like they're working like a state, they're working like a corporation. They have hierarchies, they have chain of command, they have ethics, they have rules and norms, and you see when you look at Baltimore police, you see Baltimore police actually quite all over the place and not necessarily having its bearing all together. And then, of course, the story keeps changing and shifting. But I think those are the interesting bits, which I think the a longue durée sort of a look at the state from the outside allows us to see as to these complications, where we don't see state as only through norms and rules and the laws and the parliament and the bureaucracy.
The government of our time.
Yeah, it also allows you to see the government in action, or why are people doing what they are doing, right? As in, what kind of what does an election mean, right? As in holding an election, conducting an election, what is an election commission? So some of these can just be sort of narrated in forms in kind of a rule book. But when one begins to understand the ethos, the ethics, the rules and the principles, and why is it the way it is, and how they are being violated or not being violated, or how they have been transformed over a period of years, I think that tells a longer story of both institutions and institutions' relationships with the society and the form that India is. Yeah, right?
I just feel that, of course, you're going to have all these sort of impassioned opinion pieces and commentaries and long essays from journalists. But I think it's at the end of the day, it's only political science or political theory which gives you the vocabulary and the methodology to understand what is going on now and how it is different from what came before.
Oh, sure.
I'll just make just one very simple point is that I think what makes us different or what makes the political scientists stand apart from the journalists, which is a very important task if it is done properly in its own merit. But for us, I think we are engaging in knowledge production in a manner that is going to stay longer and have a long-term conversation over these issues that we are mentioning. That could be state, the institutions, parties, the groups, the individuals who are residing in that. So we are building a much bigger block. So every single piece of research that is being produced is not just one piece of investigation, but is building towards more ideas and conceptualization surrounding that. Sure.
Yeah, so I think the question that Atreyee asked, I think it inevitably brings the question of method here. And this is something that Sushmita has pointed out, that political science is quite eclectic in its use of method. And it's also because if these questions of state, looking at the state from the margins, also looking at state-like structures, non-state actors, I think this is a question that political science cannot evade. And one of the reason and one of the ways in which it actually tackled is also maybe drawing or using ethnographic methods, or as Sundar said, looking at the state or these formations from a long durée format, right? And I'm particularly thinking about the works like Mugaliga Banerjee's work on elections, right? How does it means to the voters? Or looking at what happens between elections, or think of Paul Bra's work in the 1970s and how he actually kind of shaped the discipline of political science in India itself. So I think that political science kind of addressed these questions also by expanding its method in that place.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to move track quickly and ask you to speak. We've had a general conversation about the discipline so far, but ask you to speak a little bit about your own research, especially your current research. You can take some time to also frame it in the context of your broader research agenda and interests. But if you can also tell us a little bit about what is it you're currently interested in, what is it you're pursuing, is there something is there a project afoot, is there a books or articles forthcoming or that you're working on, and those kinds of things. So that's the second bracket of this conversation. Sushmita.
Hey, no, not me always. Dayal or Devangana.
Okay, that.
Yeah, I can go on. Yeah, so if you ask me what is the central in research interest, if someone asks me, I would think it's the combination. I think one of the most widely discussed combination of religion and politics. Right, that's what I'm primarily interested in. And one of the questions that I've addressed so far is the question of interreligious relations. Much has been written on interreligious relations in India, particularly from the disciplines of political science and sociology in the frame of communalism. But I was particularly interested on the frame of communal harmony. So can we understand communal peace as a political process? So if you look at the literature, politicians or political parties as this very derogatory role in inciting violence in the literature. But I was also looking at regions or instances where the political parties, political mobilizations has a role in shaping the larger peaceful interreligious relations. So this was a larger question that I particularly addressed in my doctoral research, which was not very long time ago. And I actually employed ethnographic methods because to address this question, it warrants certain empirical research. And I actually did quite a long field work in a very particular town in central Kerala, which kind of encompasses Kerala's religious and political diversity. It's also historically significant as the gateway of different religious traditions, not just in Kerala, but in the entire Malabar coast. So that question remains to be one of the questions to understand the politics of communal peace. I've also moved away from it, organically from it. I mean, in many ways, your field actually guides your future research, right? So I was particularly interested in the questions, particular religious political formations, to be precise, Hindu nationalist politics, as well as Muslim politics in these regions. So I have particularly observed the emergence of Hindu nationalist movement in Kerala but very particularly outside electoral formations. If you look at the literature, Kerala is often seen as an exception to the story of Hindu nationalism, but I also understood that except that understanding also comes with the limits in the frame on which you understand it. The other thing is look at the Muslim politics and the two areas of it. One is to look at the emergence of new Muslim politics as well as the history of, because the region I worked was also home to the one of the first political Muslim political formations in the state. The other research project is a very radical diversion from it. I've also been developed some interest in politics of non-religious movements, particularly on the growth of very assertive atheist movements in the digital spaces. I'm sure Karthik has worked on the intellectual history of atheism here, but I'm more interested in the rise of organized atheism, which is often called in the umbrella name of new atheism, right? And this also marks a shift in the site I'm looking at. So far I have primarily done ethnographic work in a more physical setting, but the work on new atheism is primarily on digital space. So this is a collaborative work that I'm working with Professor Johanna Squack of University of Zurich and Dr. Sandosh in IIT Madras. So this is an ongoing work. We are developing certain project proposals and articles out of it. I'm also interested in the questions of political representation, which is also something at a very nascent state. So broadly speaking, my research areas is about religion and politics, which then organically grew into politics of non-religious movements as well. Yeah.
Angana.
Um, yeah. Okay. So I think these days, a lot of times I'm introduced as an expert in gender, but I feel very anxious to even think of myself as an expert in gender because I think gender to me is an approach. So my research interest is quite diverse. And the one thing that is crucial to me and the one thing that is there in all my research most consistently is a concern or is an approach that can be considered coming from a gender lens. Uh, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always concerned about the questions of women. It could also mean I'm questioning the way power is oppressing some people as opposed to others, right? So it could be even an interstate relation where we see that there is a lopsidedness in the way the two states are operating or engaging. It could be states or two entities. So that's where primarily I'm coming from. My book was published last year. This was this is where I incorporate or I try to integrate the concerns of gender with international politics. And what I do is that a lot of gender centric conversations in IR happens around the questions of treaties and international organizations, but I wanted to bring in the conversation on culture. So I picked up two specific cultural practices. One is female circumcision or female genital cutting, and the other one is Islamic wedding. And what I tried to do, or what I did, was to juxtapose the international discourses, how the rights framework would talk about it, what are the different states talking about these practices, and what are the national laws coming out of it, as well as I did 1.5 years of field work in India to understand the local Indian formation around these cultures. So that is basically what my book is about, trying to integrate the question of gender and international politics. Alongside that, my two last works that were published. One was, as I mentioned, the way international relations uh, is kind of apathetic towards the concerns of race. So I wrote a piece on that, which was published last year. And last year I worked on uh, artificial intelligence, and I came from a place of critical critical AI discourse, which we call right now, where I actually questioned AI in a way AI also gives certain people a lot more power as opposed to certain other people. So this could be different countries. This could be the big tech hegemony as opposed to people who are whom we consider in a very common term as have-nots. So again, the questions of power imbalance, not just about the state, but within the society, amongst individuals, and of course, internationally, all these become a part of the way I think about gender. Currently, at the Center of Women and the Law, where I'm co-director currently, Professor Sarsu Thomas and we are working on an edited volume, which is due by the end of July. And that volume is on politics of weighting and gender. So we are editing multiple perspectives on weighting and how weighting itself is gender. So as I said, that I would like to work on different issues, but there is a consistency in the way I approach these issues.
Yes. Who wants to go next? Go ahead.
I'll go after Sushmita.
Okay. So I work at the sort of an intersection of urban politics and political economy. And my earlier work was looking at the transition of um, agriculturists around Delhi, when Delhi was much smaller than what we know of it as now, and how with land acquisition and Delhi expanding very fast, these agriculturists transformed into businessmen, rentiers, brokers of different kind. So I look at a period of 50 years, 60 years odd, and trace their transformation. And my bigger question was, what does it mean for the city? And eventually I came to a theorization on rent, which I will not bore you all with. Uh, but um, but yeah, I think I am. I did not become a journalist, but I still look at the question of. I'm very. So I get excited about things that are happening in the contemporary, in the present. So, as all of you already know, that there were a spate of demolitions across the country, and there was a lot of sort of churning around this machine, the bulldozer, and they were in our political rallies, they were in newspapers, they were all over. And I got interested in just looking at the machine as to where is this machine coming from? What is its history? And how is it finding its place in in a contemporary city? Like, what all is it doing? Yes, it is demolishing things, but it's first and foremost a construction machinery. So how does that contradiction really work out? So that took me to second-hand scrap markets. That took me to um, corporate history of which are the companies which are building these, what has been the technological innovation in the machine specifically. It took me to American history and agricultural history, because a bulldozer is nothing but a tractor which is made into something else. So it takes it so all of this together is now, as in it's now become something of a project. So yes, so part of this is looking at the machine specifically. So what you do here is just follow the machine. Wherever the machine takes you, you land up there and look it up. And that's how it worked. But then it also led me to a bigger chunk, which could not just become one paper, which is waste, right? So this is one thing that the bulldozer creates, which is that it demolishes, it breaks things. What it leaves behind is a lot of debris. So what happens to this construction debris? Where does this go? So then the other chunk of the paper really, or part of the work really became what's going on with this waste, especially when you know that the bulldozer is also laying lives to waste, right? So as in, it's literally demolishing people, homes, and throwing them outside the city. Whereas, and what you see, what's happening to the material waste is that, ironically, a lot of this waste is brought back into the center of the city, into these iconicized waste to wonder parks, right? And they're now ticketed parks where people walk in to see like a Eiffel Tower made of scrap metal, right? And so the waste and the people literally like change spaces, right? As in the demolished areas are now like beautiful parks in Delhi, and what were and what were these waste fields is where these demolished people's whose homes are demolished end up in. So this is where I'm tracing as to what's happening to the waste in some senses, right? So it's in some senses mapping Delhi's geography through a particular kind of waste.
Fascinating. Thank you. Karthik.
Yeah, Atrey. So, Atrey, I was just reminded of one of our very earlier conversations when you asked me what I was working on or planning to work on, and I told you Sartre and the question of universality. So, from then, which was almost 2 years back till now, that has remained only a plan. And hopefully, like several of Sartre's projects, I hope it is not an unfinished one, right? So, this time when I went to Chennai, I brought back my copies of Being in Nothingness, Critique of Dialectical Reason, and some of his other works, hoping to study them. So, why am I coming here and where am I coming from? Is that hitherto I have been interested on the questions of universality and particularity, especially vis-a-vis identity politics. So, this reflected in my PhD thesis, my first book on Franz Fanon, my second book on Perrier, and every other journal article which I've written, right? But after joining NLS and after being part of the amazing conversations here, I got seduced by these debates on constitutionalism and constitutional theory, right? And which is why I applied for a small grant, the Humboldt grant, last year for a paper on Indira Gandhi and the emergency, right? Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get the grant. So that's the paper I'm currently working on at the moment. So I don't want to put out all my tall claims here, but one of them is that, uh, whenever there's conversations on secularism and socialism being in the preamble, and there are challenges to it being included in the preamble even now, the counter response usually has been that this is constitutional morality, that that being secular or being a socialist country is part of our constitutional morality. Now, one of my tall claims is that without reckoning with Indira Gandhi and the period of emergency, I don't think it is possible to talk about constitutional morality in the post 1977 world. And I hope to explain why and what does this mean for Indian political theory and constitutional theory. And as an aside, I do eventually want to get back to Sartre and the question of universalism because it's something which has been weighing on my head, and that I think will help me come to a conclusion on several questions which I have raised in my previous research and which I feel I have not adequately answered.
Thank you. So finally, we are coming to, I'll change track a little bit more, and given all this other diverse set of kind of research projects that all of you are running, and you've come together to design this politics major minor track, what is the one most exciting thing about the politics major at the NLS BA? Anyone? No exciting thing.
No.
So for me, as in I joined NLS in the year 2020, and Atreyee, you and me were one of the first few social sciences people to have joined here. And a lot has changed in very, very exciting ways. So for the BLLB, as you would you as so would you, we were only teaching 2 courses on politics, right? As in which were mostly driven around political theory, because that's what made sense in the big law program. I'm just excited that we are going to teach a lot more of politics as a discipline, as an entire field, because by now, I think in 4 or 5 years, I think now that jadedness had started to like sort of set in, that we are only teaching one kind of stuff. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to. I think I'm excited about teaching Indian politics. I'm excited about because we studied Indian politics a while back. Like I finished my master's in 2009, and Indian politics looked very different at that time. I'd be very interested in sort of like how do you tell that story from 2009 onwards, right? As in what kind of literature then we then bring in to talk about the contemporary. Um, while in continuation with the longer study of the Indian state. So there was this very important question that we called about what we talked about was what is the nature of the Indian state, right? But then what is the nature of the Indian state now? So just I think I'm getting excited about digging up new literature that I haven't focused on for a while. So I'm excited about teaching political economy, international politics, comparative politics, and just generally like dipping my fingers in the kind of political science that I was trained in, but didn't have
Taught so
much
far.
chance to sort of do so far. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's totally fair. Yeah. Anyone else?
So I'm excited because this will be the first time I'll be teaching a intensive, full-fledged undergrad pol science course, right? So which gives me and a set of colleagues the opportunity to innovate with the curriculum, introduce several more readings which we wanted to but were unable to in our restricted time and space in the two core courses that we are teaching now, and generally be a lot more flexible about pedagogical practices. So I think this is going to be a great and successful experiment, and I'm particularly looking forward to an intensive regime of teaching political thought courses.
Sure. Yeah, Dibangana?
Um, for me, I think it's because so far in NLS again, the journey has been exciting because political theory is not necessarily the domain that I am. Which is my core area of expertise. But here we get to do a lot more with what which disciplines that we are trained in or we have assumed certain kind of expertise on. So that is quite exciting. That is quite exciting for me, particularly for me. I can speak for the course on global politics, where specifically I tried to do those things, or we tried to think about those things. What I craved as a student. For example, there is a specific chronology that is followed when you go into a traditional IR classroom. What we try to do together, we try to break that to make it more conversational, that there is no specific chronology that has to be followed for learning. It can be broken and it can be created or constructed in a different way. So something about knowledge production and how we do that pedagogically, specifically in a field like IR, I think that excites me really much. But at the same time, I think together there is with a lot of agreements and disagreements and brainstorming, I think what we could achieve here is to unlearn as a cluster a lot of things.
Right.
For example, so all of us have been trained in political science and politics as a discipline in different ways and over a big span of our life. And here we are trying to offer an undergraduate program with a major, minor, way of arranging the courses. So that has been quite challenging in trying to identify what is the core of, or what are the core questions of politics. So, of course, some of us had, we wanted to go this way, some would want to go the other way, but somewhere the process of uh, somewhere coming in the somewhere coming in between and building a bridge in terms of different disciplines that we all are coming from. I think that is really exciting. The process and of course what awaits us as we plunge into the teaching.
Cool. Dayal? Last thoughts,
Yes.
and then we'll close.
Yeah. So I think as a cluster, I can confidently say that we have kind of built or in the process of building a political science course that is quite balanced with a strong foundation in theory, as well as a very strong focus in Indian politics as well as global politics, right? So as Sushmita was saying, the current two courses that we are teaching for BLLB, it's quite strong, but we also wish that we need to tell a lot more, right? And this kind of enable us to kind of uh, go in details on all parts of the discipline of political science. And I think from a student point of view, it would kind of equip themselves to simultaneously understand the larger questions of, let's say, on abstract theories of justice, let's say, understand roles, more institutional procedural understanding, as well as what's happening, let's say, in a by-election in Karnataka, right? So I think our course kind of weave together both theory as well as this empirical institutional understanding of the very democratic framework they're a part of. I think that's the biggest highlight, according to me. Yeah.
Divakara, you want to come back?
Yes, I just wanted to make one point. So, because also did the demo class with the students at NLS, and one of the questions that was asked to me very interestingly is that there are six major core courses, and two of them are focusing on Indian politics, and why is it so? And I think, and something that I explained there, and I think I would like to reiterate that here, that no matter where we study politics, every discipline and the study around that discipline has a location. And it's very important that we train ourselves in the understanding of that location well. And that helps us. One may think that, does that help us in understanding American politics? I would say yes. If you have a very solid grounding on what Indian politics would look like, it could be political economy, it could be the meaning of democracy, we can always assume a comparative lens even when we pursue higher studies or pursue our diverse interest areas. So I think what we could achieve here is a perfect balance in terms of having adequate number of courses focusing on India. Because a graduate from India would need to learn and understand India as a location really well.
That reminds me of something Achille Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosopher, once said, which is instead of thinking the world, Africa from the world, think the world from Africa, which is that large and wide ideas can be interrogated or examined, given attention to one's local context and positioning in a particular geopolitical locale. Thank you so much for this conversation. This is really, we should do this more often in person.
Of course.
But given our schedules, it is less likely to happen. But thank you so much. Have a good night. And I'll stay on the call and stop recording now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.